All right, we're back, getting after it again, and we're talking about enemies and kind of looking at just Easter weekend again. So we talked about Good Friday and things like that, but I thought it'd be good just to kind of get an idea. We don't necessarily have real enemies, so to speak, in our daily lives of like somebody coming after us. Most of us don't. If you do, let us know. But when you guys think about enemies, or when we talk about loving your enemies, it almost feels archaic of what Jesus said, love your enemies. You're like, I don't really know if I have many enemies. How would we maybe look at enemies, or how would we have enemies today?
Well, unless, you gotta know your audience.
Sure, okay.
Unless you're from the state of Ohio.
You do have enemies.
If you're wearing a Michigan jersey, they know what an enemy is.
Yeah.
That's a great. What do you guys think? I'm kind of curious what you think about that.
Yeah, everybody, there's probably people listening that are like, no, I do. You know what I mean? Like, this boss who has a very different ideology than me, who gives me, trouble. Like, people probably have like, oh, I do. But I was thinking about this. I'm a pretty peacemakery kind of person. You know what I mean? So it's like pretty easy.
Peacemakery.
Like, yeah, it's my disposition. I'm like, I don't really have any enemies. And after Sunday, we talked about this on Easter. Yeah, you kind of just realize maybe like relationships that you can be passive aggressive with. You know what I mean? That you can be annoyed with. That you can be like, oh my gosh, like, you know what I mean? Or like certain belief systems or personalities that just like, that can kind of, you can kind of develop into an enemy a little bit. Maybe they don't know that they're your enemy, but you can be like, that becomes. So I was like kind of aware of that walking out this weekend even.
Yeah.
Well, that because I preached the sermon, so I did a little. The actual word enemy means hostile, somebody who opposes.
All right, so not
hates.
what I said.
Well, what I was thinking about what you said is, so we can think about people who might, like, you might have a personal interaction with somebody and there's actual opposition, actual hatred.
Yeah.
But when I said what I said about Michigan represents something to Ohio State fans that is opposite of. And so if you're walking with a Michigan, I don't even know you, you're just and so what happens is easy for that definition to morph.
Yeah.
If you're against what I'm against, if you're for what I'm for, that kind of thing. In fact, I think that might be close to what Jesus was addressing, because it actually was rooted in an Old Testament understanding, like the whole Leviticus 19 passage these guys were teaching, and they were adding to it. Mm-hmm. So it says, love your neighbor, and they were saying, and hate your enemy. And in that passage, it's like your people who are like you, who think like you, they're religiously affiliated with you, they racially appear like you, politically they stand for what you stand. They see the world like you see it.
Yeah. So
by deduction, your enemy is those who don't, right? Those who are opposed to you, hostile to what you're for, don't see the world like you see it. And so I do think there can be, hey, we're enemies because we have a thing, my neighbor, and we don't like each other, whatever. Which I love my neighbor, by the way. But anyways.
He's listening.
Yeah. Disclaimer.
But it can morph to people who see the world different than me.
Which I feel like we see all over the place today.
Oh, yeah.
In all different kind of ideologies. And
it's easy to put your gloves up. Like you're saying, when people look like me, act like me, talk like me, think like, those are my favorite people. I'm like, all right, we're on the same page here with everything.
Think about, you drive up beside a car, has a bumper sticker of the guy you didn't vote for.
Yeah.
What's your first thought?
Yeah.
Right? You're like, not my people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's a great way to just say it. They're not my people. That's how we define enemy.
Well, there's like an internal ease when people do look, think, act, talk, do, vote, think, believe.
You get it.
Like you're like, okay, it doesn't cause any tension in me because we're on the same page. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you ever been in a situation where you say something and they're like, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? Or someone like, and you're like, oh, well, now there's this tension within me. You know what I mean? Or that feels like, well, now I'm on the defense, or now that can feel kind of like an enemy. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't feel safe anymore to whatever. Yeah.
So when Jesus says, love your enemies. So what does loving your enemies look like without like enabling them, or just like letting them continue to have the way that might be the wrong way, or whatever the case, that you're like, how do you go about loving them? What's that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And well, I mean, the easy answer to that, without preaching this, like, so Jesus, I think, gave us three ways that regardless of the person, those three ways, he uses the word love that I think gets us confused. We think I got to have some sort of feeling towards them, or I got to support what they're for. We think that's what we think about love, and it's like that's not what he's saying. The whole nuanced word that he used is like this selfless commitment to want what's best for them. And so here's the deal: enabling them might not be what's best for them. When you talk about this word, like you guys are both parents.
Yep.
I want my kids to love me, so I'm going to let them do whatever the heck they want. Well, I'd probably take that out. Whatever they want to do, right? And
we'll throw a bleep over top.
But you guys are parents. Like you're not that would not be loving.
Yeah.
You know, if you just let them do whatever they want. And so Jesus, when he's talking about this, he said, "Pray for them."
Yeah.
Right. He says, "Do good to them." Well, enabling them isn't necessarily doing good to them if I'm enabling them to continue a sinful pattern.
Yeah.
That's not doing good.
Yeah.
Greet them. Don't ignore them. I think that's easy to do. It's like, I'm going to talk to them.
Which is what tolerance is, right?
Yeah.
Kind of just ignoring or letting be.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost been more palatable if he'd said that. Just tolerate them, avoid them, ignore them, whatever.
Yeah.
But he says love them.
Yeah.
And I think what he's saying is, as much for them as it is for me, I think he's proactively saying root bitterness and resentment out of your heart, and you're gonna have to be proactive.
Yeah.
You have to fight it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is just this teaching is, I've heard, like, early church was, like, defined by, like, this love for enemies. You know what I mean? Like, it was just, like, such a trait, because that love for enemies is didn't come from the Romans, doesn't come from nature, you know what I mean? Doesn't come from my natural, just, like, human whatever, where it's like, yeah, I think I'm going to do good to those that hurt me. And so there is almost this embracing, like, this is, when you start talking about upside down kingdom, you're like, but this doesn't make sense. Like, it absolutely doesn't. You know what I mean? At a surface level. And there is, like, an embracing of that this is, and I think for us, it does cause us to pause, because it's very easy to, like, defend or to strike back and there is something about, like, what does it look like for me to selflessly, to do good, to love, to be devoted to, like, it feels very opposite, because it is, but that is what Jesus did for us. Like that we just probably don't think we're that bad. You know what I mean? That we were his enemies when he died for us.
Isn't that the secret? I think that's the secret, right? When I begin to identify with my enemy, that's sort of the power of what you're saying pops. Is if I can't get there, the motivation is going to be like, well, the preachers tell me that I need to love my enemy. I got to grit this thing out, and it's not working, so I'm going to give it up. But if it pushes me into Jesus and I identify, I forget who the guy was. Maybe you guys remember. He says that I'm in a scary place when I begin to exclude my enemy from the community of humanity.
Yeah.
And there's something powerful about that, because I can identify with whoever that person is, because I am them. I was an enemy of God. We talked about Sunday. So I agree with what you're saying. I think there's power to that.
Yeah, maybe just closing here, I just think of the people that are thinking right now, they're like, where do I draw the line? Like there's people that are doing real damage, that are hurting, that are... this is nice. This is very cute and very nice, but like
we're cute, or
not you. Well, okay.
Mostly.
But where do I draw the line of, like, this isn't going to work? I'm going to have to take it into my own hands, or man, Jesus, he's right only to a so far degree. Like, where do we draw? Kind of the line here.
That's a good idea, but there's
it sounds nice. But it's not.
We're dealing with
Yeah.
My initial knee-jerk to that is, usually I want to draw the line because of my convenience, comfortability. I would say anywhere that draws the line apart from the cross is probably me deciding where to draw the line. I need to let Jesus decide that, and that's where this comes back. Like and I think it's hard, but I think here's the deal: if I let Jesus draw it, here's what's going to happen. My appreciation and gratitude for what he did for me is only going to grow if I allow him to draw the line. right? Now I'm not going to get run over. I'm not going to let somebody, like we talked about that in another podcast. It's like but I got to let him draw the line, and I think it's radical.
Yeah.
Because I think the gospel's radical, and I don't think we've allowed it to be radical enough. Jesus saved me, but I was a pretty good guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's not at all what scriptures teach. Jesus saved me, and I was an enemy of God. Yeah. And then when that radical gospel takes over, it explodes in a radical way, I think. So I think, where do I draw the line? At the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And anything beyond that is probably me drawing a line that I just feel more comfortable with. I'm redefining the gospel. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's important to think of, we're in America, people have enemies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like whether it's like ideological or just like, this is a really hard situation I have to go into work every day with my boss, and they know I'm a Christian. Like, there's those situations. There is something throughout the world now and church history, not perfectly, but there are Christians throughout the world that are like
Mm-hmm.
serving and loving their enemies,
Mm-hmm.
that want to kill them. You know, that the early church did that. Like, it's just important for us to remember. You know what I mean? When Jesus says hard things like take up your cross, lose your life to find me, you're like, yeah, there's Christians that do die. You know what I mean? So it just kind of helps us recalibrate those, like, you know what I mean? Like, those things are real.
Mm-hmm.
I think of what he said, Jesus gives the, like, pray for them, do good to them. Maybe it's just starting with, like, where do I draw? Maybe it's pushing. If there's a line in your brain, it's like, start praying. Maybe it's this political season for that boss at work that you're like, they are so opposed to me, and they're out to get, which very real thing. You talk to people, it's like, what does it look like to start praying for them every day? You know, like praying for them. Like, I don't like them. Like, pray for them. What does it look like in a small way to, like, okay, how do I do good and start moving that direction? You know what I mean? And just those small practices. And stuff.
That's interesting. Don't you think it's interesting? The Bible says, as followers of Jesus, we have an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And to not follow and trust Jesus, that's what it boils down to, not just doing the rules of Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
to trust him in this is to play into the hands of our enemy. I think that's what Jesus is saying. It's like, if you don't follow me here, you're going to give the devil a foothold, the book of Ephesians says. You're
Yeah.
going to play into the hands of
Yeah.
the real enemy
Yeah.
that you have. And I think that's easy to happen, and all of a sudden, resentment, bitterness, and even we lose influence in the
Yeah.
world in which we live. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Feels like there's such a competitive nature in our world too. That's like, I've got to win, you know, to show that I'm right
I
or
love to
whatever. And where we just, what'd you say?
I love to win.
Yeah, I love to win.
I'm not even competitive.
Yeah. But it's almost, and we take that to the nth degree of like,
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
to beat our enemy down and be right or whatever the case. But
Yeah.
More concerned about being right than we are being righteous, which is what Jesus is saying. Unless you're righteousness surpasses in this whole Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ethan. I really do. I like to win too sometimes. Yeah.
well, that's good. That's good. Well, guys, it's been good being able to sit down
I
and
love
chat
talking
about
to
it.
you guys.
It's a good time. Till next time.
We love talking to you too, Dan.
Thank
Yeah.
you.